And so what I want to do today is one, tell you a little bit about, that my story is those things. It's raised in a home with a devout Catholic mother and a devout atheist father. And so they were soon divorced. And so my sister and I lived with my mother until she finally succumbed to mental illness. We watched my mother deteriorate. So you already have this separation, the trauma of separation. Your father's coming and saying, hey, I'll see you every Sunday, sometimes. And then you're living with your mother, who is deteriorating from a very vibrant woman to a woman that's often catatonic for days at a time, no personal hygiene, sitting at the kitchen table for days. And so for my sister and I, we learned very young and very early on that we're going to have to be dependent on ourselves. There's no such thing as love. There's no such thing as trust. There's no value in thinking, feeling, or talking, because no one's there to hear it. So you learn a very strong sense of autonomy and a very unhealthy sense of autonomy and dependency that causes you to isolate, go within yourself, and then find the remedies if you're not going to get peace through relationships, because those all fail. You're going to have to figure out where you're going to get it. And for myself, I found out at the age of 8 when I smoked a marijuana cigarette that all that emotional dysregulation went boop. And I went, wow, there is a reason to live. And so, remarkable statement for an 8-year-old, right? And so I then moved to New Jersey and took up marijuana smoking regularly 3 times a day before, during, and after high school. I even had teachers I smoked with. When I wasn't in school, I was at the beach. I lived 20 minutes from the beach and spent most of my time on the beaches of Belmar and Seaside Heights and those places. And barely got through school, decided I have no discipline, and I wasn't probably at a place where I was going to address my addiction and say, with honesty, I have an addiction issue, which at that point I was probably already an alcoholic and at least a marijuana abuser, if not addict. But I was growing this thing in me. I was growing the propensity for addiction, which was already coming down through my family. If we did a genogram of my family, we'd clearly see where all kinds of trauma, let alone drugs and alcohol, came down through my family. So my tendency to probably get addicted was much higher than most. And we weren't aware of that. There was no awareness to that. Who remembers studying how to handle an addicted loved one from ages K to 12? We're still not doing it. I hope I raise up some advocates. Why aren't we doing that? And so after realizing that the military might be a place for me that would create some discipline, joined it right out of high school, joined the Air Force, did very well on the 8 hours of Air Force, and was an alcoholic on the after hours. Got out early to be a rock star, grow my hair long, smoke more pot, which I did, played music for a very long time, and that lifestyle took all of those original propensities for that hedonism and that self-indulgence skyrocketed. And so I eventually found powder cocaine. And then eventually that went to crack cocaine, and that's when lifestyle breakdown began to occur. Never intended to lose everything in my life, but my first love and my investment, my ultimate concern, which we all have one, some are healthy, some are unhealthy. My ultimate concern was an unhealthy, and it was drugs and alcohol. For some of us in a faith community, you might say it was my place of worship. And so there's an expression that says we become what we invest in. And think of it in these terms. If a person spends too much time in the gym, we give them a little name, go with lunkhead. So we even identify people by their investments. It's interesting. Too much time at work, you're a workaholic, right? So it's interesting how we really become notable and identified by our investments. And so this investment is an investment in death. It's not an investment in life. So naturally, it will begin to deteriorate all domains of a person's life because you're investing in something that does not promote, it decays. And so after joining the Air Force, getting out, I found myself deeper and deeper in crack cocaine, eventually finding myself homeless. My parents did an intervention on me after a couple of failed attempts at short-term programs and said, you got to go to Teen Challenge. I wasn't a teen, thought it was just for teens. I was 37. And I said, I'm not going to a teen place. They said, well, it's not for teens. It's just a brand, and now they're an adult facility, and that's what we are. And the other factor for me was it was a faith-based organization, and I was an argumentative atheist. And so the last thing I thought I would do is go to a faith-based program. But I was also logical, and I looked up their website, and they had a 78% success rate. Then I looked up the success rate of the 30-day shorter-term programs, 2 to 5%. Wow. Because I knew a part of me wanted to be clean, I wanted to be different, I wanted to be able to live in my potential. Otherwise, it would have just taken my life, and that's the evidence of believing there's no hope. So for each of us that enters into any process or treatment or continues to sustain the addiction, that means that within us is an essence of hope, or we'd simply take our lives, which is the evidence where hope was lost for that person. And so playing on that string of hope, I joined Teen Challenge, and of course I came in very argumentative to their therapeutic model, which was basically a relationship with God and the Bible. and just sort of use the precepts and the principles. And I figured the value system is really what our culture is built on. Businesses, axioms are all built on biblical foundation. They just don't return it to an author. And most of society is based on the conditions that are really biblical values. Self-control, gentleness, kindness, peace, all these things are biblical values, and we all operate in them. So we just all of them decide what our author is to those. And so I decided to put some authorship on God of the Bible and figured, you know what, this is working for me. Felt a real tangible relationship with God. Part of recovery and the treatment process is trying to understand there's something greater than ourselves. There's a natural propensity for each of us to want to be a part of something greater than ourselves. The Marines have a billboard on the side of the highways right now that say, come join the Marines, come join something larger than yourself. They knew to play on the human nature string. You are a part of something else. Your family is the thing larger than you. So we're born into something larger than ourselves, and that's the great value of family, that first simple society, is we're a part of something larger than ourselves. So this was a model at Teen Challenge. I followed, found great result in it, and I realized that there was great potential that had been laid dormant or oppressed by the addiction. I always loved to learn, and I had several people come to me, want to go back to college, and I thought, you've been talking to that guy? And there's just a lot of people saying this, so I did. So I went back to college, and I did very well, and I'm still in school. I don't know how to stop. Somebody's got to come in and do an intervention on me, because I don't know what, I'm in a doctoral program. I don't know what's next, but I haven't heard stop yet. So am I going to become a professional basket weaver? I don't know what I'm going to do next. But there's probably going to be something else. And so it's been a wonderful path, and what I did is took all that skill set, all of that training, and came right back to the Teen Challenge. It saved my life. And so now I'm the chief clinical officer there. I'm second in command under our executive officer, and have the amazing honor and privilege to do things like this, but to give away what was given to me. The goal of all learning is to give it away. And no matter what you're learning, the idea is that you go out and teach people that. That's the goal of learning. And so we learned an incredible process through this current epidemic, and that's what probably gives me a little bit of a stage with you more than usual, is because we have such a great epidemic. So my timing is probably right on time. And so we do have a great epidemic. We have 18.5, every 18 and a half minutes in this nation, we lose a person to addiction. So in the time I'm talking, we lost at least 2. Don't you find that remarkable? In this country, we lost from 2000 to 2014, 500,000 people to a drug overdose. Don't you find that remarkable? 500, did you hear that? Call it 500K, put up zeros, but 500,000. That's remarkable. And so this year alone in Pennsylvania, which is one of the highest abusers in the nation, and one of the highest rates of death by overdose is Pennsylvania. We're 7th and 3rd. And we've had, in 2015, we had 3,500 deaths by overdose, and we're on track this year for 500,000 businesses booming. And there's no evidence that it's on any rate of decline or plateau. It seems to still be skyrocketing. And so we are all a player in this epidemic. I would say for us, this is our generation or our culture's Black Plague. It most certainly is. I mean, there's really not a high degree of difference. We're combating something that we're having a hard time finding a quote-unquote remedy for. That's a plague. That's a plague condition. And so we're striving, we're working more often than not. It ends up being more about prevention and recovery and getting people to stabilize more than it seems to be about something about really trying to find what might be the cure. Each individual, each treatment center, every person has to design around that, their philosophy, their theology of what does that cure mean for them. And so that's the process that each of us coming out of addiction should be on, is discovering where does the freedom come from for us, and what does it elicit, and what does it inspire in us. And so what I really want to share with you in the time I have, and hopefully leave a couple minutes for questions, and I'll try to linger a little bit if you have questions for me privately. There are myths of addiction, and there's things that we don't understand about addiction that has really been some of the problem. One of the first myths of addiction is this, and it's maybe one of the most important one. There's an addiction myth that says that, I'll read it right from the paper just so I keep my wording right. Overcoming addiction is simply a matter of willpower. You can stop using drugs anytime you want if you really want to. Addiction alters the brain. There's three conditions of addiction, because addiction affects the mind, okay? But it affects the individual, because you understand whatever affects this, whatever condition this is in, will be elicited through what comes out of here and what comes out of those. If this is infected, that's going to be infected, and so is this. So with addiction, it changes our entire value system, because there's a great demand to meet the demand of addiction that's inside of the individual. It's basically telling them that they're not going to survive unless they use. And so we start to slight our value system. Once we abandon our value system, becoming deceptive and stealing and lying and cheating, to even our own self-harm, let alone the harm of others, where that total abandonment becomes a great level of spiritual oppression. There's a level of emotional bankruptcy that may have been inspired prior. It may have been some inspiration for the usage to begin to pick up the first time. The love tank is empty. Maybe you've heard that expression. That's a condition of addiction. And then there's neurobiological impairment. There truly is a brain change. And this is where we start to get into the idea of disease concept, which I know many of us struggle with. So I'm going to try to bring some clarity to that as well. But let's start talking about how does it change the brain, which is the most complex organism known to the planet. How does it come in and affect the brain, the body, the mind, and the soul? The way addiction works is the reason it's not a matter of willpower is that we can identify that there has been a brain change. Some of the problem about the disease concept and what people will argue on is I can't go get a microscope and go into the body or life of a person in addiction and find what I might find in liver disease or what I might find in the body with cancer, is I can find what's called a disease agent. And I can identify, and I feel a great level of peace in the fact that I have evidence, and that's enough, and we can say, yes, that's what that is. And so that is an argument point, because there's no stethoscope, there's no microscope that is going to identify the disease agent for addiction, because addiction affects the mind, so it is bio-psycho-social spiritual. It affects all domains of a human existence. There's no place to put it. And so we begin to argue against it being a disease. Let's get away from that. What is measurable by CAT scan and otherwise is that the brain is absolutely changed by ongoing use of chemicals. We can measure the brain and identify the parts of the brain that are being affected. We can see that it changes the shape. It changes the synaptic pruning in the brain, which is all those little ripples. It changes those. We can clearly see that it changes the wiring, and it changes the response in the brain to healthy stimuli. And so in that regard, it becomes the characteristics of addiction. It becomes chronic, progressive, which is what addiction is according to disease, chronic and progressive, and potentially lethal without intervention. These are the conditions of disease, and that's absolutely identifiable in the brain. So we're going to have to choose what side of the argument you want to be on. If you get stuck on the first side, well, we'll be there for hours. We put Post-it notes all over this room speculating. We'll fill the room. But when we get on the side of the evidence of what happens as a result of the usage, it's very hard to argue that it has a disease component. Very hard. We struggle with it, and I understand that. So each person has to find their own resolve with that. But this is what it does to the brain. At this point now, you've had a meal. But right before this meal, what you had in this area right here is you had a great emptiness right here. And that great emptiness is called hunger. And so what happened when you felt hunger is that there was a brain message sent to your brain called a neurotransmitter. And the message that was sent to the brain was this: survive! That's what it sounds like inside the brain. So where it didn't go is it didn't go to the prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning, which decides what color socks to wear today. It doesn't go to the optional part of the brain, hunger. It goes to the part of the brain responsible for survival. It's a very conducive and extraordinarily important part of the brain. It's the same part of the brain responsible for fight, flight, and freeze. Somebody breaks in through your front door, you don't sit there and evaluate your decision. You're either going to fight them, you're going to freeze, or you're going to run. The brain takes care of that for you. It's called survival. For the most part, it's involuntary. You don't sit there and prefrontal cortex it and evaluate, maybe I should just have a conversation with them. You're running for the door, you're running for your gun, whatever you're at in that. And so here's how it works with that. So now I have this demand in me going to the survival part of the brain, hunger. Well, what happens is it's so powerful that it now dictates what I'm probably going to do next. So here we are, you and I, we're good buddies, we're driving down the road, I'm driving, you're talking, and you're talking about everything, every part of our life, and I'm listening, I'm very interested, up until the point I hear survive in my brain, because hunger just kicked off. So now all I hear next to me is burgers, what I'm really doing now is I'm just waiting for you to pause long enough so I can report to you, hungry, must seek food. That's all I have interest in right now. And what I will probably do in you is inspire in you the message of food represents survival. And Lord forbid you also have a hunger. You're immediately going to confirm with me and say, yes, yes, must seek food. The whole conversation now is going to be about where to eat, who to invite, what to eat, where should we go, blah, 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 blah. The whole thing. It only takes 10 minutes. That's what the conversation is going to be about. Then you're going to set a course to that plan. You start making phone calls and inviting people. We all need to survive together. And then you're going to look at each other and say, what were we talking about? And nobody's going to remember. You know why? Because it was optional. It doesn't matter. And you're going to talk about something else then. Then what happens, you get to your favorite eatery and you satisfy the message of survive by eating. The next message in the brain Success! Great job! Do it again and again and again and again and never forget to do this. See, that process happened to you at a very young age, but it wasn't until you started to have adult cognitive functioning to where the message became an intellectual property in you, and you recognize it as something that you have to adhere to. And so that success message also helps you out too. The brain says, listen, we're even going to help you out one more step, is I'm actually going to take a neurobiological brain picture so you never forget. So in other words, whenever you even see food, whether you're hungry or not, you're going to understand that it means survival. So now it's 11 o'clock at night, you've had 3 meals, there's no reason to be hungry, but that little stinking Roman ruler comes on, that little Caesar who's got 27 pizzas for $1, and you see the cheese melting, and you're bored because you're not occupying your energy with any other messages other than pure intent delivery from the television. And the brain message goes off, remember that? And the little picture shows up, ding, ding. You go, pizza, that means survive. And you look at your friends, you want to order pizza? They go, yes, I do. Any reason why? No idea. Survive. Because there's no reason to be hungry. Now I want you to take all of that, and now I'm a person who is craving drugs and alcohol. Same message to the brain, this is how the brain changes. Now the message goes to that same part of the brain that's responsible for survive. So I hear parents say, well, we didn't raise them this way. Why'd they keep stealing from us? We don't raise people to have brain disease. We don't raise people to have cancer. We don't raise people to have kidney disease. It's a condition. Do they have to own the condition of picking up for the first time? You're stinking right they do, and so did I. But the fact is, if I get stuck on the why, and what they shoulda, coulda, woulda done and call them bad people because they picked up, we're never going to fix the problem. That's where the stigma gets created. That's where the shame gets created. See, I know you see me as an immoral person when I'm using, and I am living outside of my moral values. But you've decided that my behaviors are my condition. So I even get called an addict. Boy, we don't call cancer people cancer men. If you're a person of faith and you understand there's a level of sin that exists in your nature, we don't call you sinner. We call you by your first name. We don't label people by their condition or culture, but we do in addiction. We got to be careful with this. It takes an empowerment and education to know how we're going to combat addiction. If you think about it in terms of the guy, let's say there was a guy that made a terrible decision to drive drunk in our culture. And does that happen occasionally? Certainly does. And he wrecks his vehicle and loses his leg. Well, we should all show up and say, well, you shouldn't have drove, and leave him right there on the side of the road, right? But we don't. What do? We preserve life. That's what we do. And then we talk about what he needs to get for his correction and all the other stuff, which is certainly a part of addiction. We have to own the choices we make. But we have to meet the need. We have to get that person to a hospital. We've got to get that person into a place that preserves life. And we'll talk about their behavior and the decisions they made once we preserved their life. And so this is what I would ask you to be thinking about that. So we definitely have a brain condition with addiction. It's not an excuse. Matter of fact, it should motivate us to want to get it to a hospital. But part of the brain disease that comes with it, and some of the problem with, is what it does, it also creates in us denial and delusion. We don't want to believe we're in this condition. It happens for families who don't want to believe they have an addicted loved one. So they try all kinds of things like pleading, bargaining, threatening, sound logical advice, and it all just seems to be wind blowing off the face of me as I just wait for my moment to ask for $20. It's always about getting $20 from you. Always. And so you see, what you're trying to do is you're trying to have logic with a person with a brain change. It's never going to happen. What the person needs is a hospital. Every conversation be about you're going to treatment and you're going today. And if you don't go today and make that decision, these are the decisions we're going to make. Because you see, we value our lives as much as you value yours, and we value your life as much as we value our own. And what's happening is you're asking us to embrace the death style. We don't know how to embrace death as human beings. Every part of our culture, including Rotary Club, especially Rotary Club, promotes life and wellness and enrichment. It's the whole point of the club. Even our funerals are never a discussion about death, are they? They're a discussion of life, discussion of what the person established. We don't know how to embrace death. So when a person in addiction is telling you you should stay still with them in death, your answer to them is never personal. It's not about loving you or not loving you. You're asking me to oppose my wiring. I don't know how to embrace death. I'm sorry, I just can't go there with you. So here's the choices I'm going to have to do to preserve my own life, because I'll go down with you if I'm not careful. Matter of fact, everything in my house you keep taking out the door that isn't nailed down. Because you got a brain problem, you got spiritual oppression, you got emotional bankruptcy, and you got a neurobiological impairment. I don't got the advice for you, but I know a wonderful treatment center that has all the help you need. I don't have it. Here's the 3 C's that a loved one needs to understand about addiction so that you don't become falsely empowered or disarmed. You can't cause someone's addiction. No one in this room can cause a brain change. You can't. So take yourself off the hook. No one caused it. There's never been one set of parents that did everything right or everything wrong, ever in the history of humanity. If you're a person of faith, you know who had the first set of wacky kids? God. So if he can have some wacky kids, you might have some wacky kids occasionally. And so the other part of it as well is that you cannot control it. It requires a hospital, and we believe because it's behavioral, they're just rebellious, and we'll just teach them to stop. It doesn't work that way. You're trying to talk a brain change out of someone. It requires complete abstinence. It requires an environment conducive to change and conducive to people in the room who know how to motivate that change, how to bring the therapy that elicits the choices that the person needs to make to start healing emotionally, spiritually, physically. The statistics say that it takes alone for abstinence about 12 to 14 months to ensure a high level of success for a person's brain to heal, to be able to start to do these other things. So you see the problem we have a little bit with the 30-day programs. All programs should be designed to be a continuum of quick care. We need them all. We need the short term, we need the long term, we need the outpatient, we need the detoxes, we need them all. They all should be working cooperatively. And when they're working in an isolated way, you can hope for the best, and there's a moderate level of success if you isolate them, but not to the degree of success. The longer I can keep a person in this process, the better. And this is where the external motivation of the family needs to come in the same way my family came in and intervened on me and said, Joel, we can't embrace death, but if you take this plan, we will come 100% alongside of you. And so they had to make the choices for their own life because they realized that their sound logical reasoning, they tried and tried, nothing changed. They also realized to some degree they were enabling me. They realized by paying my cell phone, that was the money that I spent on drugs that I should have been paying for my phone. Keep in mind, most of us are adults by the time this is happening with our families. If we're not careful, we're 30 years old, still living in our high school bed with the old posters from the 1980s basketball players. And so we have to, parents and loved ones have to know that sometimes the response is not to embrace strong, it's to refrain from embracing, and to create some counterintuitive responses that create discomfort that motivates change. One of the greatest gifts we have as humanity is pain unless we respond to it with more pain. And that's often what we do with denial and delusion as families, is we keep responding with more pain because we think we can treat these people in addiction like rebellious kids. They're not that. It's not a behavioral issue by nature. It's a brain change. It's a spiritual condition. They got to get to a hospital. I know parents and loved ones that can spend 15, 20 years trying to work with someone and just totally thwart it. That's the value of me coming today, is my hope is I'm giving you an empowerment and education. So when you're met with a person in addiction, you know what the proper responses are. And the proper responses, no matter what happens next, you need a hospital. In sales, there's an expression that says always be closing. No matter what you're talking about with the person, you always want to get to that pen to the paper. So it's listen, yes, Johnny's high school, wonderful. And then you're saying, yes, and you still need to go to the stinking treatment center. So you hear what they have to say, and it's great, and they can say what they want to say. Wait for them to pause. You don't respond to any of it because it's all just malarkey, because it's a person with brain change. Can't put faith in any of it. Wait for them to stop talking and always be closing. That's great, and I appreciate all that, and you need to go to the treatment center. Always be closing. You have to view a person in addiction as a person with a lethal wound. If I came into your home and I had a gash right across my neck, and that was kind of a grotesque view, but if I had a gash across my neck, you wouldn't run to your Band-Aid cabinet and get your bacitracin. You would pull me by my hair into the car and you would take me to a hospital. Even if I said to you, I don't want to go, you would not stand for it. You would do everything in your power to get me in that car because it isn't a time for an emotional appeal with that person. It's a rescue mission. And that's what intervention is. And that's what we have to understand about believing that people have to want help to get help. It's not true. They did a study with prisoners, and they studied an example of 100 prisoners. They took 50 that were there in the treatment program the prison mandated by the courts, and they took the other 50 that were there voluntarily. And you would think that people that were there voluntarily would have a higher success rate. They didn't. It was 60-40. The mandated people had a higher success rate. So we got to get away from, that's the other myth, is we have to be careful about this myth that people, they have to be inspired to get into an environment that elicits the desire for change. This idea of sitting around and waiting for rock bottom has been killing people for 20, 30 years. We figure as families we're helpless unless we just got to sit around and suffer it out, and there's something called raising the bottom, where we increase the discomfort by no longer enabling the addiction. And sometimes we gather around them in an intervention and say, listen, we love you, and we need to fight for this family, and we're going to fight for ourselves, and our hope is you're going to join the fight, because we're not going to let addiction run our family to the ground. We're just not going to. From this day forward, we are never going to be an addicted family again, and we never had to be. We postured as victims. We're not victims, and neither are you. There are plenty of resources. Get out here and get the change you need. You're going to make some decisions today. We're going to make some decisions today for your for what we think is in your best interest, and don't lose sight of the fact that we're also going to make some decisions that are in our best interest. Because see, I have a family and a life to live. I can't be bound by another person in addiction who's making a choice to not get help. I won't do it, and neither should you. And so we give people the opportunity to move forward. Listen, we're out of time. I don't know if we have any time for questions. If you guys want to close, that's fine. I can meet you privately.
Yeah. With the current society and states embracing recreational drug use, marijuana, legalizing, do you feel that's still the gateway drug, and do you feel that should not be a publicly promoted policy?
Yeah, two responses to that is absolutely it's evidence as addictive, and it absolutely has some long-term developmental negative effects on people. So that's the first part about it. So it absolutely is addictive. It's called a psychological addiction or a psychological dependence, not called a physical dependence. So people see it wrong, but there's a psychological dependence. The gateway aspect of marijuana, get away from the idea that you think it's a gateway drug because it biologically somehow makes me then want to go use cocaine. There's some evidence of that as we begin to lubricate that reward system to getting greater levels of reward, but that's not what they mean by gateway. What gateway means is when I smoked marijuana, I used to go into the circles of people that smoked marijuana. Guess who else is in those rooms? People that snort cocaine. He looks like he's digging his high more than mine. I'm going to talk to that guy. That's the gate. It's the gateway to the culture. Addiction is not just simply an event or even a process. It's a culture. All my basic needs that I couldn't get from larger society, status, intimacy, acceptance, self-acceptance, I find it all in that room. All of it. And you're dragging me out of there telling me I should go into larger society and go to treatment. You're going to have to motivate that decision because I found everything I need. Even though we're killing ourselves, it's in there. That's the problem with it. Here's the other part of it. If we already know that there's some negative effects that happen through marijuana usage, in Colorado, the emergency room trips for children who have found the marijuana and overdosed on has gone up 30%. So there's all kinds of negative effects. See, we already have one epidemic in our country, but it's just a celebrated epidemic, and it's called alcohol. So if I already have alcohol and it's killing millions and millions of people every year, but we still celebrate it, and I get it, each his own, I don't want to add another one. We already have one. I don't want two. And so I can't go there. Medical marijuana is a different subject, and I would have more confidence in medical marijuana if I felt that we had more confidence in our medical doctors to understand addiction. If we had a whole lot of confidence in our medical doctors to understand addiction, we wouldn't have this opiate epidemic. They didn't know how to handle those meds. So how are they going to handle marijuana? One school in Pennsylvania has an addiction track for doctors. One, the University of Pennsylvania. And you want me to start putting marijuana now in these doctors' hands? Evidence to me that you'll control it better, and then maybe I'll get on that side of the argument.